Home has always been my comfort zone, my small two-bedroom house tucked away in a quiet Oregon suburb. I'd lived there for almost 3 years, just me and my dog, Cooper. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful, until last winter. It started subtly. Every few nights, Cooper would bark toward the ceiling. Just one sharp bark, low and uneasy, like he was warning someone. I'd tell him to hush, assuming he heard a squirrel on the roof or the wind rattling the vents. But deep down, something about the way his fur stood on end made me uneasy. One night, I heard it too. A faint thump, somewhere above my bedroom. Not loud, just enough to make me freeze mid-scroll on my phone. I told myself houses make sounds, especially when it's cold. Pipes expand, wood shifts. That's what I believed. Until the following week. It was around 11:30 p.m. I had just turned off the TV when I heard slow, deliberate footsteps, coming from directly above me. I remember the exact rhythm. 3 steps, pause, then 2 more. Cooper started growling, low and constant. My heart was hammering. I grabbed a flashlight and, against all reason, pulled down the attic ladder. The air that drifted down was icy. The smell, stale and dusty, like old cardboard. I climbed halfway up, shining the light into the darkness. Nothing. Just boxes and insulation. I almost laughed at myself for being paranoid. But then I noticed something that stopped me cold. One of the storage boxes had been moved. I knew because it left a square outline in the dust where it used to be. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called a handyman to inspect the attic. He found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no animals, nothing. But that night, around the same time, I heard whispering. It sounded like 2 people having a quiet conversation right above me. When I turned off the lights and listened, it stopped. Completely. I started staying at my sister's place for a few nights, just to get some rest. When I came back that weekend, everything looked the same, except for one small thing. The attic ladder was slightly ajar. I hadn't touched it. That's when I called the police. They searched the entire house, attic included. After about 10 minutes, one of the officers called me upstairs. I'll never forget his expression. Calm but unsettled. He pointed to a corner where a few insulation panels had been pushed aside. Behind them was a small hollow space barely big enough for a person to crawl into. Inside, they found a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and a phone charger plugged into my attic outlet. Someone had been living up there. The police said the person probably used the attic access when I was at work and stayed quiet when I was home. They never caught whoever it was. I changed my locks, installed cameras, and eventually sold the house. Now, whenever I move into a new place, the first thing I check isn't the kitchen or the view, it's the attic. Because I learned something that winter, sometimes the most terrifying intruders don't break in. They've already been inside. I've always been a light sleeper. Every creak, every car door outside, it wakes me up. It's annoying most of the time, but there's one night I'm grateful for it. Because if I'd slept through that sound, I might not be here to tell this story. It happened last February. I just moved into a small rental house outside Denver. Nothing fancy, just a cozy 1-story place with a fenced yard. It was my first time living completely alone after my breakup, so I was trying to adjust to the silence. You know, that kind of silence that feels too quiet. The first few nights were fine. I was still unpacking, getting used to the new creaks of the house, learning which ones meant plumbing and which ones meant the floorboards complaining. But on the 4th night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound that didn't fit any of those categories. Footsteps. Soft, careful ones, not heavy like boots, but not light enough to be a pet. They came from the hallway, moving slowly toward my bedroom. At first, I thought maybe I was dreaming. I held my breath, straining to listen. The steps stopped right outside my door. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat up, staring at the sliver of light under the door. Nothing moved. No shadow. No sound. Just silence. After a minute, I told myself it had to be the house settling. Maybe a pipe or a raccoon on the roof. I turned on the bedside lamp, grabbed the baseball bat I kept under the bed, just in case, and quietly opened the door. The hallway was empty. I checked every room, even the closets. Everything was normal. So, I went back to bed, feeling stupid but still uneasy. The next morning, something small but strange caught my eye. The hallway rug, the one I placed right outside my room, was slightly crooked, like someone had stepped on it. I brushed it off, but that night, I locked my bedroom door before sleeping. At exactly 3:07 a.m., I woke up again. Same sound. Footsteps. Only this time, they didn't stop at the door. I heard them circling the house. Slow, deliberate, like whoever it was knew exactly where to step without making noise. Then came a faint tapping sound. 3 knocks. Not on the door, on the window. I froze. The window was behind me, covered by heavy curtains. I couldn't see anything, but I felt someone there. I didn't move an inch. I just sat in the dark, clutching the bat, trying not to breathe. After what felt like forever, the sound stopped. I stayed awake until dawn, listening to every little noise. When the sun came up, I checked the window. The outside screen had been pushed up slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough that I knew it wasn't like that before. I called the landlord to see if maybe maintenance had come by. He said no one was scheduled, and he didn't have a spare key. That's when I decided to install cameras. Just 2, one at the front door and one facing the backyard. I figured if anything weird happened again, I'd catch it. 2 nights later, at almost the same exact time, I woke up again. 3:06 a.m. My heart sank. The same footsteps, faint, slow, pacing near my room. This time, I didn't get up. I just grabbed my phone and opened the live feed from the cameras. At first, I didn't see anything. Then, in the backyard camera, a small movement near the edge of the frame caught my attention. A man. Standing at the back fence. Not moving. Just watching. His face was hidden under a hood. I froze. My thumb hovered over the "Call 911" button, but before I could tap it, he tilted his head up, directly toward the camera, as if he knew I was watching. Then he turned around and walked out of view. The police came and checked the yard. No footprints, no forced entry, nothing. They told me it was probably a prank, maybe a trespasser who'd seen me move in and decided to mess with me. I tried to believe that. But what the officer said next made my stomach twist. "You said you moved in last week, right?" "Yeah." He looked at me. "Your neighbor mentioned the previous tenant moved out because someone kept trying to get inside at night. They never caught the guy. After that, I couldn't stay there. I packed my things and moved to a different part of town within the week." The weirdest part. When I checked the camera footage before I left, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The man in the backyard wasn't just standing still. If you looked closely, you could see his reflection, faint but visible, in my living room window. Which meant he wasn't standing outside the fence. He was standing behind me. When I first moved into that little duplex, I loved how quiet it was. It was an older building, sure. Creaky floors, thin walls, those drafty windows that whistled when the wind picked up, but it felt cozy. My favorite part was the big glass back door that led to a small patio. It faced a patch of woods, and at night, I'd sometimes sit there with a cup of tea, watching the trees sway under the porch light. Peaceful. Or at least, it used to be. The first time I noticed something strange, it was small. Just the door. It wouldn't lock properly. Sometimes it clicked fine, other times I had to jiggle the handle and pull it just right to get the deadbolt to catch. I figured the frame had warped a bit. Old houses do that. But one night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of the wind rattling that same door. I went to check it, half asleep, expecting it to be slightly open again. But when I got there, the door was perfectly shut, yet the lock was undone. I stood there for a second, staring at it. I knew I had locked it before bed. I even remembered testing it because the wind had been howling. I turned the bolt again, double-checked it, and went back to bed, trying to convince myself I'd just forgotten. The next morning, I noticed something new. A smudge. A faint handprint, right on the glass. It was larger than mine, and lower, like someone had pressed their palm against it while crouching. I tried to brush it off. Probably from when I was cleaning, I told myself. Maybe I'd touched it without realizing. Still, I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling, that tiny instinct whispering something was off. A few days later, I came home from work, and the back door was unlocked again. Not wide open, just unlocked. I stared at it for a full minute, trying to think logically. Maybe the landlord came by to check something? Maybe I forgot to secure it that morning? But when I called him, he said he hadn't been there in weeks. That night, I pushed a chair under the handle before bed. It made me feel a little safer. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to a faint creak, not from the floor, but from metal shifting. The handle. Someone was trying it. I froze. I didn't move. The sound came again, a soft clink, like fingers testing the knob, slow and careful. Then silence. I didn't dare breathe. I could see the faint outline of the door from the moonlight leaking in. The chair hadn't moved. After a long minute, I forced myself to whisper, "Who's there?" Nothing. Just as I was about to grab my phone, the motion light outside flicked on. It washed the patio in white light, but through the glass, I saw nothing. No one. The next morning, I found footprints. Clear as day, leading from the edge of the woods straight to my door. Bare footprints. In the frost. That was enough for me. I called the police. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. One of the officers noticed the door lock and told me it looked like someone had tampered with it, like a screwdriver had been forced into the latch, bending the mechanism just enough to keep it from locking properly. They suggested I replace the entire door. I did. A week later, I felt safe again. The new door locked tight, no more noises at night. But then, one morning, when I was heading out for work, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Right at the bottom corner of the glass, barely visible in the sunlight, was a single fresh fingerprint. On the inside. I've always been a bit of a bargain hunter. Yard sales, estate sales, thrift stores. I love finding hidden gems. So when I stumbled upon an online ad for a lightly furnished apartment at a ridiculously low rent, I jumped on it. It was in a quiet neighborhood, close to work, and honestly, it looked too good to be true. The landlord, an older man named Frank, seemed nice enough. He said the previous tenant moved out suddenly, left behind a few pieces of furniture, but everything had been cleaned and inspected. The place wasn't fancy, but it felt warm and homey, almost like someone had just stepped out for groceries and never came back. There was an old bookshelf in the living room, a recliner by the window, and a large mirror on the wall opposite the couch. That mirror immediately caught my eye. It wasn't decorative, just plain, rectangular, framed in dull brown wood. Something about it felt out of place. Like it didn't belong there. But I brushed it off. New place, new quirks. The first few nights were fine. I unpacked, watched TV, cooked dinner, normal stuff. But every time I walked past that mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the reflection itself, it was the angle. The way it seemed to face slightly toward the couch, not flat against the wall. Almost like someone had adjusted it to watch. On the fifth night, I was half asleep on the couch when I heard a faint click. Like metal shifting. My first thought was pipes or maybe the fridge settling. Then I heard another one. Closer. Near the living room. I turned off the TV and listened. Silence. Then, out of nowhere, the mirror made a soft tapping sound, like something brushing against the glass from the inside. I froze. Stared straight at it. Nothing moved. I told myself it was probably just the frame expanding with the heat. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The next day, while cleaning, I noticed something strange. The mirror wasn't hung flush to the wall. When I leaned closer, I saw a tiny gap along the edge, just wide enough to catch a glimpse of something dark behind it. Wires, maybe. I didn't have the nerve to check. Later that evening, my friend Megan came over to see the new place. She sat on the couch, facing the mirror, and joked, "Creepy thing, isn't it? Looks like one of those two-way mirrors from cop shows." I laughed it off, until she stood up, walked over, and pressed her finger against the glass. "Huh," she said. "You know that trick where you touch the mirror and if there's a gap between your finger and the reflection, it's a regular mirror? But if it touches, it means it's two-way." She pointed. Our reflections touched perfectly. We both went dead silent. The next morning, I called the landlord, trying to sound casual. I asked if he knew anything about the mirror or the wiring behind it. He chuckled and said, "Oh, that's just leftover from the previous tenant. Probably just decoration. Nothing to worry about." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Around midnight, I finally worked up the nerve to check. I pulled the mirror off the wall. It was heavier than it looked, and behind it was a small square opening cut cleanly into the drywall. Inside that hollow space was a tiny camera, and next to it, an unplugged router. My hands were shaking. I backed away and called the police. When they arrived, they confirmed it. The camera had been live at some point, transmitting somewhere, but it was disconnected recently. They also found scuff marks on the floor, like someone had moved in and out through the crawlspace behind the wall. Here's the part that still haunts me. When the officer ran the name Frank, the so-called landlord, he said the owner of the property had passed away 2 years ago. The man I met had been using his name, and no one has seen him since. Now, whenever I move somewhere new, I never get too comfortable. I check every wall, every mirror, every vent, because sometimes the people watching you aren't outside your home. They're already inside it. When my roommate, Dylan, told me he was moving out, I wasn't too worried. We'd been renting this small 2-bedroom place just outside Seattle for a year, and I figured I'd find someone new within a month. I didn't love living alone, but it'd be temporary, or so I thought. After he left, the house felt different. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound, the fridge hum, the floor creaks, even your own breathing. The first few nights, I kept thinking I heard Dylan's door move. Not open, just shift. A soft click like it was settling. One night, I heard it again. I was on the couch watching TV when I swore I heard a faint thump from his old room. My stomach dropped. I told myself maybe I'd left a window open. But when I checked, everything was shut tight. The weird thing was, the air in that room felt colder. And the smell, musty, like sweat and dust. I left the door open that night, just to prove to myself there was nothing to be scared of. The next morning, it was closed. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I'd shut it without thinking. I hadn't. I was sure of it. Still, I laughed it off. Houses make noises. Doors move. No big deal. But then little things started happening. Food disappearing from the fridge. The bathroom light left on. I even found my phone charger moved to the kitchen counter once. I began doubting myself. Was I just being forgetful? A week later, around 2 a.m., I woke up thirsty and went to grab water. The hall light was flickering, and from the corner of my eye, I noticed something. Dylan's door was open again. Only this time, there was a faint glow coming from inside. I froze. The light was dim, like from a phone screen. I took a quiet step forward and heard breathing. Slow, steady, and definitely not mine. I backed away slowly, heart pounding, and called the police from the porch. When they arrived, they searched the room. At first, nothing. But then one of the officers looked up. There was a loose ceiling vent above the closet. Inside it, they found blankets, water bottles, and a small backpack filled with clothes. Someone had been living up there. Turns out, Dylan never really moved out. The officer said it looked like he'd been sneaking back in after I left for work, sleeping in the crawlspace, eating my food, using my things. They eventually caught him a few days later in another neighborhood, trying to get into a house through the attic. Sometimes I still wonder how many nights he was right above me, listening, waiting. I moved out soon after. But I'll tell you this, Whenever I hear a faint thump at night, I can't help but look at the ceiling and think. Some guests never really leave.